This is your World War III update. Here's what's going down. What a wild ride in the markets today. Finally, people with oil investments got a little bit of relief on the blatant insider trading that commenced before Trump issued his 90-day tariff pause on countries that don't even do a lot of trading with the United States. Because you see, here's the deal. The Chinese, who do the most trading with the United States, with the exception of Mexico and Canada, all three of the aforementioned still have full-blown tariffs imposed. In fact, on the day that one of the United States' biggest trading partners seen an elevation of tariffs to 125%, just hours after Xi Jinping said, we're going to raise ours to 84%, the market rallied in a way that I don't think I've ever seen it rally before. This has never happened before. Now, the NASDAQ went up 14% one day. I believe it was in 2001, but it was nothing like this. The actual numbers, like the trillions, and the speed that we seen it today, the speed was staggering. It was almost like some kind of short squeeze on the entire market. It was a sight to behold, and it's a sign of a dying economy. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's over. We're back. It's green again. My friends, this is what they call irrational exuberance. And in fact, they've wrote many books about the subject. It's when the fundamentals are completely disconnected from reality. You need to understand that this market is still more overvalued than the dot-com bubble in 1929. Okay? Still more overvalued than the dot-com bubble in 1929. The value of public and private equities versus GDP ratio is the highest it's ever been, despite the recent correction. And let's not forget, these equities markets are still down 15 to 20% from their highs. So we are in no way, we're at the peak, we're at the crest, the high watermark of the dead cat bounce right now. I've never seen anything like this. And anybody who thinks that this is a sign of a healthy market, especially as we're going into a world war and the major trading partners still have massive tariffs imposed, including China, the one who makes everything, the one who forms the backbone of the NASDAQ itself that's rallying today. Okay, all of the NASDAQ is made in China. Think about that. Now, what's scarier is that retail is about to get rugged once again. Okay, retail is piling in. The only reason why Trump decided to pull the plug on this thing, and he didn't really pull the plug, but he knows that the markets are going to react in their irrationally exuberant way, as they always do, to the faintest suggestion of bullish news. The only reason why is because 30-year Treasury bonds were hiking. And of course, this could upend the entire market. So not just the stock market, but we're talking about Main Street as well. We're talking about high mortgages. We're talking about bank loans and foreclosures and the whole 9 yards, right? The whole economy would come upended. And of course, China is selling its bonds. And I think that's what's scaring the United States. They're exchanging their U.S. treasuries for their U.S. debt, I should say, because that's what it is. They're not treasure at all. Their U.S. debt for gold. That's why the price of gold. Now, look at the price of gold. It has been consistent. That is the real barometer, thermometer for social chaos. That's all you need to look at, okay? Now, the Asian markets are rallying, but not the Chinese markets. Actually, let me just double check that to make sure we are up to date here, because something could have changed in the equation. But this volatility is not a sign of a healthy market. Now, the Japanese market, of course, they're going to rally because that one is tethered to the U.S. But the Hang Seng, the Shanghai are basically flat for the most part. So we're seeing a descent into world war. Now, consider what has happened. Let's consider the broader context. Now, remember, the top three trading partners, in fact, I have it right here, including Canada, okay? So we have Mexico, Canada, and China, and then the EU, the tariffs are still in play, and the EU imposed counter tariffs today, okay? So that's all still in play. The biggest economies in the world that all of these equity markets rely on so that their stocks perform and yield the returns that investors expect, all of those markets are still in the red in terms of tariffs impositions. Now, the TikTok deal is off the table, the White House said today, and that's the canary in the coal mine, okay? Because if you can't resolve something like that, is this thing even on yet? Are we good here? Are we good? Are we recording here? We're good, guys? We're good? Okay. Jeez, I thought I was going to have to start this over again. Okay. Now, recently, China has issued a travel alert for the United States, okay? Travel alert for the U.S. This was just a few days after the U.S. made a law, and I actually had to look at this twice because this is a throwback to World War II internment camps, but the U.S. made a law prohibiting public officials from having any relationships with people from China. And I looked at it and I thought, well, Chinese, members of the Chinese government. No, just people from China, okay? That is crazy, all right? Now, you might say, okay, well, it's a national security risk, but as far as I know, China wasn't a designated enemy by the White House. In fact, they're one of the biggest trading partners. They're where we get all our stuff. But suddenly, they've become enemy number one. And people are just hating on China for no reason, right? They're just, they're communists. Well, okay, before I go any further, I want you guys to understand one thing. What do preppers and the Chinese have in common? Now, I'm not saying I'd like to live in communist China. I'm quite happy where I'm at. But you need to understand one thing. What are the Chinese doing? They're stockpiling wheat. They're stockpiling all kinds of staple food products. They're stockpiling gold, metals. They are in the process of basically building a self-reliant economy. They're building the most amount of solar panels that the world has ever seen, okay? They're getting ready to be self-sufficient. Now, does the government have a problem with preppers where you live? They certainly do where I do. They don't like people who are independent. In fact, China has the most amount of guns, albeit those guns aren't in the hands of their population. So China are like the preppers of the planet, okay? And it's no surprise Western governments loathe China like they loathe preppers because they can't control them, okay? So understand that preppers have more in common with the so-called communist Chinese, even though the imposition of tariffs is the most communistic thing that a person can do. Giving preferential treatment to corporations just because they do business in a certain place is communism in the truest form. In fact, it's really fascism in a lot of ways because it's corporatism, but it's like communistic corporatism. Isms. Who gives a schism? It doesn't matter. All you need to know is that communist China and most of these axis of evil countries have more in common with preppers. So ask yourself, why do the governments of the world hate preppers like they do all of these so-called axis of evil? It's because they can't control you, okay? If the government, if you could do everything for yourself, there would be no need for the government. They couldn't justify their existence, all right? Now, we also have China basically dispersing treasuries in exchange for gold. We have pharmaceutical companies now are going to be faced with tariffs. We had the owner of Jace Medical, the pioneers in the space of providing preparedness-minded people with access to prescription medications. Sean Rowland, I always say Rowland on the channel a few weeks ago, warning people that they're going to impose massive tariffs on pharmaceutical companies, and sure enough, here we go. All that's going to do is raise the price of pharmaceuticals. Again, it's going to create unfair advantage and preferential treatment for domestic companies who don't actually have to legitimately compete by making innovative products and doing it in a cost-effective, responsible manner. That's what's the gist of it. Now, a U.S. admiral has also confirmed that 2 men of Chinese origin were fighting for Russia and they were captured by Ukrainian forces. Now, this story is a few days old, but it's implicating the Chinese in the war against Russia. And as you're going to come to find, The deeper and more volatile things go, the faster the crash goes, the more civil unrest you have, the greater the vested interest in all parties involved in entering into a broader conflict. They need to rally around the flag moment. So if China's market plummets as a result of what the United States is doing, the Chinese government, in an attempt to take attention away from the domestic immiseration that's happening to their population as a result of these trade wars, is going to refocus people's attention on a war, presumably at least in the near term, with Taiwan, or an embargo on Taiwan, which of course would get them tied up with the United States, who would attempt to break that embargo. That's how it'll go. First, the Chinese will try to restrict any access into Taiwan and try to create a stranglehold on that population, or greatly control the stuff that goes in and out of Taiwan. And the United States will send a warship one day, and they'll try to escort said warship into Taiwan, and then there'll be an altercation with the Chinese. There's also the Panama Canal thing. Pete Hegseth made a very belligerent statement today when he said that we are taking back the Panama Canal from the evil communist Chinese, or something like that. It was one of the most undiplomatic, unstatesmanlike statements that a person could make, especially in the current climate. Okay, and all this is going to do is push the Chinese into backing the Iranians even more. And if the Chinese wanted to, they could arm the Iranians to the tits, they could provide a nuclear umbrella, they could even provide nuclear weapons. And there's not a damn thing that we could do about it. They could do it. And the further you push them away and isolate them from the global markets, the greater the incentive they have to protect their interests, which is in Iran. So why wouldn't they just want to reallocate a few nuclear weapons or extend their nuclear umbrella to the Iranians if it ensured that they would have a constant supply of oil? All right? Now, Trump is saying that he's pausing tariffs for 90 days. Again, this is only on the countries, I'm not going to say they don't matter, but they're the countries that don't really do near the amount of business that the EU, Canada, Mexico, and China do. It's not even close, okay? That whipsaw NASDAQ, I mean, that S&P 500 going up, what, 9%? Something crazy like that? I mean, that is just, that's not sustainable. That's going to crash. Just watch. Just watch. It's going to crash. The next black swan. If it can go up that fast, imagine how fast it can go down. There's no circuit breakers in the upward direction, at least as far as I know. There might be, but as far as I know, there isn't. But there's circuit breakers in the downward direction to try to break the fall. Because when that one comes, boy, is it going to be nasty. No direct talks with the United States. According to Iran, Trump says that Israel would be a leader of a military strike against Iran if Tehran doesn't give up their nuclear program. So they're saying, we want you to give up your nuclear program. All right? The Iranians have said these aren't direct talks. These are indirect talks. It's going to be passing notes between Witkoff and what's his name? Abbas Agachi. I can't remember what his name is, but the Iranian foreign minister, which are pretty high-level officials, don't get me wrong, but I don't believe that Witkoff is nearly as good of a negotiator as people think he is. I think that Trump trusts him, and that's about it. But just because you trust someone doesn't mean you're actually going to make progress. And what we're seeing in Russia is proof of that. Now, there's also another competing theory with respect to what's going on with the markets, that this is an attempt by Trump to undermine Russia's oil industry, knowing how heavily dependent they are on that. If you can crash the prices of oil by crashing the global economy, then Russia's economy is presumably going to crash as well, or it's going to hurt them a lot. But what was happening was it was starting to impact a lot of U.S. oil industries. So it could be that Trump pulled the plug on this. They didn't really pull the plug, but again, sent out that tweet in an attempt to rally the markets and uplift the price of oil, which went from negative 4% to plus 5% in a day. I'm pretty sure that's got to be close to a record as well. The reason why they did this was to revitalize the U.S. oil industry, which they're going to need when the petrodollar decouples from the rest of the world, okay? So there's that. Iran is also sending missiles to Iraq. Iran's Revolutionary Guard secretly transferred hundreds of short to long-range cruise and ballistic missiles to its paramilitary forces in Iraq. Now, this comes just days after there was apparently some sort of deal being brokered for the Iraqi militias to relinquish their arms to the United States, who is about to enter into a greater economic partnership with Iraq. But now, allegedly, out of the blue, you have these Iranian militias who just so happen to have hundreds of long-range missiles. Those are very expensive missiles. They're not very easy to smuggle into a place by the Iranians. So Iran is already being implicated as in Iraq, so that the United States perhaps has another excuse that they need to go into Iraq. Now, you're hearing some rumors right now that the United States might pull out of Eastern Europe. They have 10,000 troops. Well, all that's going to be is this. They're going to eventually move those troops into the Middle East. And they're just getting, the groundwork ready in order for that to happen in an expedient fashion when the time comes. That's all that's going on there, okay? Estonia is claiming that they're going to sink ships with what? I don't know, but I talked about this the other day, but it bears repeating. Okay, something's going to go down in the Baltic, and it's going to go down in short order. The Estonian parliament passes a bill allowing it to use force against any ships suspected of intending to damage underwater sea cables and in extreme cases. So basically, it's like stop and frisk, but in the Baltics, and they can just basically, without probable cause, just whatever, reasonable suspicion they want to conjure up, they can stop a Russian ship, and if a Russian ship doesn't comply, that's when they're going to board that ship, and they're not, the Russians aren't going to recognize it because, of course, it's in international waters, and the Russians will retaliate, likely in a kinetic fashion. Okay, the Russians have a lot of restraint, but I don't think they're going to be pushed around by a country like Estonia. Now, it's important to understand what this was today. Okay, some people, no matter what Trump does, some people are going to say it's a win, some people are going to say it's a loss. All this is that Trump's seen the markets tanking, and he's seen it spreading into the bond markets. He's seen it spreading into the broader economy as a whole, and it wasn't being contained. And so they decided to temporarily put the brakes on it. But it's not over, okay? It's not over, not by a long shot. The market is still more overvalued than ever before. I mean, consider, it would be one thing if there was no pending tariffs at all. It would be another thing if the biggest 5 or 6 trading partners of the United States weren't still tariffed. There'd be another thing if there weren't 3 major conflicts that were festering, that could flare up at any given time. And all of the other problems that the world is currently facing nowadays. Then maybe on the day that the stars align, you could justify these hypervaluations of stocks. But nothing justifies a rally like today, asides the irrational exuberance of a generation of investors who have just been conditioned to believe that this is how markets work. And no matter how many times it crashes, they're going to keep coming back. They're going to keep coming back. And most of this was FOMO. But the first hour, the first hour of this rally was not retail. I think it was insider trading for the most part. But retail was most certainly came in afterwards and was scooping things up. But because everybody wants to get back in the game. Look, I have exposure in crude oil, and oil's going down right now. And that tells you at the time of making this video that this is a fake rally. This is ephemeral at best. Silver is staying about where it was. And so that tells you something else, right? That tells you that because they know the NASDAQ is made in China. How can the NASDAQ rally if everything that is made in China is going to go up in price, and those companies' costs is going to go up in price, and their profits are going to go down? Okay, it just makes no sense. The fundamentals will win in the end. They always do. They almost did in a rapid fashion never before seen in history, but this is yet again another historic day. You know how I've overused the term unprecedented? Okay, unparalleled. I mean, this is a term that I use increasingly. It's almost like once a day now. It used to be once maybe a year, then once a month, then once a week. Now it's pretty much once a day. These historically wild oscillations in the stock market are not normal, and they're a sign of a sick market. And what's crazy is that the volatility index, the VIX, is down 35%. But this is just a sign of the VIX is rigged also, because volatility works both ways. The VIX is not supposed to be an indication of market, and I'm not sure exactly how it's calculated. Maybe it's trading activity or something to that extent. But the VIX, volatility is both up and down. It shouldn't be low volatility just because stocks are going up. That's not, it shouldn't be the VIX goes down because stocks go up. That's not how it should work. This is a dangerous, dangerous market, perfect for swing traders and people who can get in and get out and kind of read the room. And I think the thing that we've all been underestimating here, and even myself, because I'm a believer that this is World War III related, and that is the major force that's underlying this market downtrend. But we've all underestimated the power of insider trading, and that's most certainly a thing. When you're close to Trump, and remember, Walter Bloomberg tweeted out a few days ago, who's a prominent Twitter influencer, I guess. I didn't know up until that point. He tweeted out that there was going to be a 90-day pause in tariffs, okay? And that tweet was walked back by Carolyn Levitt, and she said that, no, that's fake news. Well, so was it fake news? Was there insider trading? Were people buying that dip at that point, guys? Or did they just learn that, hey, all we have to do is say there's a 90-day pause in tariffs and the prices will skyrocket and people can position themselves ahead of time, and there's a lot of actual technical evidence of that. I'm not going to get into it today, but I assure you, even Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday was bragging about buying, and there's this whole new campaign, stop being a wimp and, quit being such a sissy boy because, the markets are going down. Even Trump said as much today, and all of his cronies that surround him are saying, just quit being such a wimp. The markets don't matter when it's a red day, but they sure as hell matter when it's a green day. And boy, did they come out and boast about it. What a crazy world. What a crazy time we're living in, man. It's absolutely insane. Understand this, though, and I think I already stated this, a few points of rhetoric for you to ponder today. The worse the crash, the more the civil unrest. And when civil unrest starts brewing, war becomes an easy way to tighten controls over the population. The deeper the downturn, the more likely the conflict becomes, and that's called the doom loop, okay? So this is why the economic austerity leads to catastrophe, increases the likelihood of conflict, in a nutshell, because the people who are in power benefit by taking people's attention away if they can find a common enemy to rally against. I already talked about the prepping similarities with the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians. Oh, and one other thing that the Chinese do, in addition to stockpiling grains, metals, gold, all the vitals of life, oil, building solar panels, they also are one of the biggest builders of bunkers, and they have the largest subterranean complexes to ensure that their population could survive full-blown Armageddon should it arise. Now, try to make sense of the Mexican standoff that is the relationship between China, Russia, and Iran. Here is it in a nutshell. When oil plummets, it's bad for Russia, who's an oil exporter. It's great for China. So China was actually, even though their economy was taking a hit, their stock market, not their economy, but their stock market, and China's stock market is more tied to the fundamentals. It's not wildly overvalued like the United States. The Chinese stock market is rather fairly valued. And in fact, most of the guests I've had on talk about how China is actually a good investment, okay? Because of that very thing. Fundamentally, it's a good investment. China benefits from low oil prices. So, the United States is in a bit of a, how could you say, a catch-22, quagmire, paradoxical situation where if they lower the price of oil, it's going to negatively affect the Russians, so they can burn out the Russians with that, or it's going to enhance the Chinese and the Chinese economy because they thrive when they get cheap energy. It's also going to be really bad for the Iranians, okay? And so there's this interplay between the price of oil and how it affects. What the heck did that guy almost drove head on it. What the hell is going on here? This is crazy. Does this guy know me and he's coming back around to see who I am? I'm getting that vibe right now. No, just some guy road raging. Okay, we good. Just a little road rage. And just imagine what it's going to be when the lights go out. My goodness. Okay, now in terms of the Iran war, if there was an Iran war, who is that good for in this trifecta? It's good for Russia if there's an Iran war because that's going to jack the price of oil and Russia is going to get stinking rich. It's going to be bad for China because China, of course, needs cheap oil to fuel its industrial machine, and they are a net importer of oil. So that's not good. And it's also, of course, bad for Iran at the same time. It's also good for Russia in that it takes the attention away from the Ukrainian Eastern European front. Now, if the Ukraine war spreads, that's bad for Russia, that's great for Iran, and it's also good for China. So China, in a sense, has a vested interest in sustained hostilities on the European front, so long as Russia, who also is one of the biggest providers of energy to China, so long as the administration in Russia is not at risk of being taken out. Okay, so long as there's stability and it's a managed conflict, it benefits China, takes attention away, they can continue to get stronger and prepare for the inevitable clash in the Pacific. Now, if China does Taiwan, that is great for Russia. Okay, it's bad for China because then they're in it now, right? And there's no more holding back. And the Chinese who study the art of war, they're only going to enter into a conflict if they mean it. There's going to be no más o menos. There's going to be, it's going to be all in or nothing at all. So when the Chinese committed to the 34% tariffs, you knew they meant business and they were willing to go all the way. Now, it's good for Iran if China does Taiwan, because that, of course, takes attention away, because as Pete Hegseth has said, the Chinese are the primary adversary. Now, whether you want to believe that or not, whether that means that they're going to be first on the chopping block, of course they aren't. They're going to go for China through Iran by taking out not only the Russian source of oil, but also the Iranian source of oil. But it's going to be bad for China, good for Iran, good for Russia. So you see, there's only one scenario where it's good for all three. Okay? And this is what's called Day X. Now, Day X can be nuclear or it can be non-nuclear. There is a distinct possibility that the following is going to happen. Right around the same time that the Russians, right now, they're preparing to do a major offensive. It's supposed to start in May, but by the looks of things, it could start sooner. There's a massive convoy, miles-long convoy, getting ready to what appears go into the Zaporozhye region, okay, and attempt to retake the city of Zaporozhye and possibly other parts along the front. Now, that could coincide with some sort of embargo on Taiwan, which could coincide with the United States and Israel making a move on Iran. And it's starting to look like that's what's shaping up. That right when that happens in Iran, the other two fronts are going to ignite. I think that's what happens. That's Day X. Now, if there's a nuclear exchange, because the United States are already green lighting the Israelis to do the strike. I mean, they got all the assets pre-positioned. They're getting the troops flown in there, record amounts of weapon shipments. They're basically setting the stage for a major conflict with Iran. The only way all three stand to benefit is if they all light it up at once. That's going to be a game of whack-a-mole that the allies in the Pacific, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Europe, and Israel, and all of the other countries, they're not going to be prepared to deal with that. You can't fight a war on three fronts, okay? And so the United States would be spread out way too thin. That's the only way they get a aggregate net benefit, a synergistic benefit, is if they all attack at once. Because any other situation, one is going to benefit and the other two are not. As I indicated, Iran war, bad for China and bad for Iran, great for Russia. Ukraine war, bad for Russia, good for Iran, good for China. China does Taiwan, bad for China, good for Iran, good for Russia. You see? So when the front gets refocused on any one of those three, it benefits the other two, but it's terrible for the person who is in the crosshairs of the transatlantic alliance, which of course we can't, we also have to include in that the Asian allies as well. So that's it. That's day X. And it's coming. And I would say to people, this is not financial advice. I warned people a few days ago. Not a few days ago. I originally warned people, as I've beleaguered this point by now, but 6 weeks ago I warned that the markets were going to crash. And since that time, they're still down, even after today, about 15%. I would advise people like I did 2 weeks ago when the markets looked like they were making a comeback. I would say now might be a good time to reconsider your investments. When things are in the green and when you're seeing a little bit of a bump and maybe the loss isn't going to be too bad, that might be a time to reconsider. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Not financial advice. This may be one of the last opportunities, man. This may be it. Now, I've laid out, the most bullish case here is World War III. I mean, that's the bull case, okay? Now, if I was a long-form investor, which I do have exposure to oil, commodities in a world where you have 9 billion and climbing, or was it 8 billion? I don't even know what it is now. 8 billion people and climbing who are using more and more energy, regardless of whether population goes down or not. More energy is being consumed. I mean, one person could consume untold amounts of energy. There really is no limit on the amount of energy one person can consume. And when you know that 6 to 7 billion people on the planet use 1/100th the amount of energy as the average Westerner, I mean, commodities. Even if we were to build out a new multipolar protectionist world, then that in and of itself is going to require so much minerals, oil, metals in order to build that all out. It's a no-brainer, okay? Even if we go into a war economy, as our guest indicated the other day, that war is heavily dependent on silver, even precious metals. Never mind rare earth metals. David Morgan was talking about that the other day. I'm getting my guests mixed up because it's just so much is happening. Anyways, my friends, just stay focused, stay laser focused on preparedness. The one thing you cannot ever go wrong with at this point in time, and futures are turning negative as I make this video, is anything prepping related. You just can't go wrong. If it's a big investment that you have to make, I don't care if it's solar, I don't care if it's a machine that runs on diesel that's going to help you do work. I don't care if it's a rain catchment system, a new well, a new chicken coop, some storage containers that you can throw a bunch of shit in, throw it in the woods, some land, anything like that. That's never going to be a bad investment, ever. Okay? And those are all things that are going to increase in price as the dollars come back home, okay? Because the casino doesn't have enough to pay out everybody. And it's a big game of musical chairs. Commodities, in my personal opinion, we're just at the beginning of a commodity cycle. And in fact, looking at gold right now, moving back towards its record highs, okay? Gold should be going down. If this was real, gold would be going down and crude oil would be skyrocketing because the economic boom times were here again. We're not seeing that. In fact, silver is still about 10%, maybe a little bit more than that off the highs. So until I see oil get cranked, not for the purpose of war, of course, until I see silver get cranked and until I see gold plummet, that's how you know we are nowhere in the clear. These markets could crash tomorrow. And I mean crash tomorrow. I think what's happening here is two things. Trump knew that, okay, the whole thing was coming undone. We got to do something. We got to at least put the brakes on this. We're getting a little, pride is the downfall of man. So we need to reel it in just a little bit. And after the talks fail with Iran this weekend, it's going to be one thing if the market is in free fall collapse and everybody is trying to rationalize that. Getting MAGA to basically, getting MAGA to accept two major promises that were not kept by the Trump administration, that's a whole different thing altogether. So I think that would have actually potentially hurt Trump and his base, and that base that is incredibly loyal, that I think will stick with Trump even if he nukes Iran. They'll find a way to minimize it. But I think having too many stressors at once could potentially compromise that relationship just a little bit. So let's see what happens here. Crypto, and Bitcoin is still really near the bottom at 80,000. That's another tell. And crypto is actually declining again. So, yeah, that's what's going down in the world, guys. The dollar is still low. What are rates doing right now? Rates have kind of come down a little bit. The Nikkei is 8%. European markets have yet to open. Let's just see what happens. Thanks for watching, my friends. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And, I want to give you guys a heads up. We're testing out all kinds of new tech on the channel. I am no technophobe, not at all. So we're checking out the latest tech innovations that I guarantee you even the tech guys haven't even shown you yet. Okay, so stay tuned for that. We try to explore unconventional methods of staying ahead of the preparedness curve. A lot of them are gimmicks, but occasionally you find a winner. And I reviewed something today that I got to say, it blew my mind that it actually worked. I was screaming in the park when we were testing this thing out today, shocked that it actually worked and how well it worked. So stick around. Thanks for watching, my friends. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe.